Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. I left off saying, hey, let's take a look at those lymphatic vessels, but really I wanted to take a look at our lymph and our lymphocytes. So let's talk a little bit more about that lymph. So we said the lymph is the fluid once it enters the lymphatic vessels. And we said that it's coming from the arterial end of the capillary. Let's say that it flows across your tissues. And then we see it entering the lymphatic capillary. And we will be talking about those lymphatic vessels in our next video. The lymph then is just this fluid, right, that has initially exited the bloodstream, moved across your tissues and into the lymphatic capillary. And so what will we see in the lymph? It's going to be very watery. So there's going to be a lot of water. You're going to have, let's just say, white blood cells. So you would expect to see those lymphocytes, but also you're going to have macrophage, you're going to have dendritic cells, you're going to have neutrophils. So you're going to have some very important defense cells present in the lymph. We talked about it as transporting dietary fat, and along with that, the lipid-soluble vitamins. So of course, that's going to be in that lymph as well. And as that fluid is washed across your tissues, I would expect that it's picked up some waste materials as well. So you might see some of that in the fluid as well. Ultimately, remember that the lymph will make its way back into the bloodstream. So any of that solute will make it back into the bloodstream. So that will be significant. Let's spend a little bit more time looking at those lymphocytes. We've said that there are 3. So we listed the NK cell, and we talked about the NK cell as part of immunological surveillance. We said NK stands for natural killer, and we'll have a whole conversation about that in the future. So just kind of hold on that. Let's next look at the T cell. And the T here stands for thymus, because remember, the T cells are going to mature. And I'm going to actually say they're going to be trained and mature in the thymus. So the thymus is a gland that's located, I'm going to talk more about it, but it is going to be located between the sternum and the aorta. So it is in the thoracic cavity. It's going to contain a lot of macrophage and dendritic cells, and then also these developing T cells. So the immature T cell is referred to as a thymocyte. So that's an immature T cell. And when we say that these T cells are being trained, what we see is they have located, sticking off of their cell membrane, they have these receptors, and these receptors are there to recognize and bind with antigen. And so I've pulled this image directly from our OpenStax textbook, which remember is linked in the video description. What you're seeing is your phospholipid bilayer, and sticking off from that, we see what's labeled as an alpha chain and a beta chain, and they've color coded the alpha chain orange and the beta chain purple. And at the bottom of each chain, you have what's called a constant region. And then at the top of each chain, you have what's called a variable region. And this is going to be, the variable region is going to be the part that will bind. I'm going to say recognize and bind. To antigens. This is where the specificity comes into play when we talk about T cells and we say they're able to target and kill pathogens. They're going to have a high level of specificity. They will come in like 100 trillion varieties. So we have like 100 trillion different variable regions that are possible. So we should be able to have T cells to all of the possible pathogens that we're going to come into contact with. This is part of our genetic inheritance. So this does vary by individual based on, you know, what your ancestors have experienced, right? And so this is part of our inheritance from our ancestors. When we say they're being trained, these T cells are actually pairing up with things in the thymus. And if your T cells pair up with your cells, those are destroyed, because we don't want T cells that recognize, bind, and then kill our cells, right? So any T cells that are recognizing our cells are going to be destroyed. And then those T cells that are recognizing the pathogens that are present are going to survive. So there's a training process that's happening in the thymus, which is really interesting. When we talk about T cells, we will see that ultimately we get two varieties that are produced. We get a CD4 T cell and a CD8 T cell. And we're going to be talking about these more as we progress in the future. Okay. The T cell, remember, is part of the cell to cell or cell mediated defense. And again, we're going to define what that means as we progress. The third type of lymphocyte is called our B cell. And remember, the B cell also has a high level of specificity. It also has a receptor that recognizes and binds antigen. And again, it's at that same level of 100 trillion different varieties of B cells present in our body. The B cells also have a training process. And so again, if your B cell is recognizing self, then it should be destroyed. We do not want to be producing antibodies to our actual tissue. The B cell would train and mature in the bone marrow. And so that's actually where we're getting the B cell name. We can talk about the B cell as the humoral mediated response. And what this means is we will see the B cell will make a cell called the plasma cell. And this is the cell that will actually secrete antibodies. So the plasma cell is the cell that actually secretes antibody. And we'll be talking more about that process as we go through. So when we talk about lymphocytes, we have the NK cell, which is involved in immunological surveillance. Stay tuned for more. We have the T cell, which is trained and matured in the thymus. Remember, we have the hormone thymosin, which is going to be involved in the coordination of T cell development. The T cell in its early version is called a thymocyte. And the thymocyte is the cell that goes through the training to become the mature T cell. And we have two varieties of T cells. We're going to see either CD4 or CD8. The B cell is maturing and training in the bone marrow. And this is part of our humoral response. So when the B cell is activated, we'll see the production of a plasma cell, and the plasma cell is actually secreting the antibody, but that is coming from our B cell. All right, up next, let's look at lymphatic vessels. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.